Well, hello folks, welcome back to GB102. In this brief little time here, what I'd like to do is discuss how to do your timeline project. It's going to be due here at the 5th week of class, and many of you have been asking, well, what exactly am I looking for? How do I make this timeline project? What constitutes an A? What constitutes a B or lower? And so I'd like to try to just sum up as much of that as I can, and hopefully this will prove somewhat helpful to you, that it will direct your project, it will direct how you do the research for the project, and specifically I'm hoping that it gives you a sense that you can do this, that this is not an insurmountable project, that it's actually could be quite fun, and hopefully it'll be something that you can look back on through the rest of your school career and say, yes, that was A, informative, but B, it's something I can use in my ministry here for a long time to come. So one of the first questions you're going to have to kind of wrestle with is, how do I make this timeline? And specifically, you're going to have to ask the question, do I make this timeline digital, or do I make it solid state? Do I make it something physically that I can touch with my hands, or is it something that only exists on a computer? And so let me just kind of break down really quick some of the pros and cons of either one of these mediums. In the digital medium, you have several things going for it. The first is that if you make a mistake, you can easily edit it. You know, there's nothing better than saying, I didn't mean to put that there, point, click, and it's gone. Or I need to move that to a different place, point, click, and it moves. And so one of the benefits of using a digital medium is that it allows you to edit as you go. And because it's saved digitally, when you have to submit this thing to me online, it's already in a format that's easy to upload, probably either in a JPEG or PNG format. Now, additionally, another pro of a digital medium is that you don't need to plan as much before you begin, simply because a mistake won't, kill a large sheet of paper. You can usually backtrack, you can wipe over a mistake, and if push comes to shove, you can just delete a large section and start over again without incurring too much in the way of cost. And so planning, you're allowed a little bit more freedom that way, that you don't have to have a very solid plan before you begin. So I'm sure by now you've already kind of pondered some of the cons of trying to submit this kind of a project as a digital format. And probably the biggest of those cons is just simply, you've got to be very comfortable using your computer to manipulate data, and specifically to manipulate visual data. Now, if you want to go simple, I suggest using a program like Microsoft Paint, simply because a program like Paint comes free with most computers, and I can provide you a template. In fact, I will link it here right with this lecture as well, but you can use a template and you can simply copy, paste your material as you go. Now, if you feel a little bit more adventurous, you can use other programs such as Photoshop or web-based programs like Prezi. All of these will work fine and will probably suit your needs for this, but it does require you to be very comfortable using them already. And because they tend to have a steep learning curve, if you're not already using something like this for your own pleasure or for work, you'll probably not want to try to figure it out over the next couple of weeks as you've got a major assignment due. Now, another con of a digital format is that the file will probably be enormous. To submit such a digital file, it's probably going to be several megabytes, and it may have difficulty uploading, especially if you have a slow internet connection. So let's look at the alternative. Another thing you could do is you could simply provide a solid state medium. And by solid state, I mean something that you can physically touch with your hands. And this can be anything like something done on poster board, on canvas, on any kind of paper. The major thing you want to do here, though, is that you want to make sure that you're comfortable using whatever tools you're using. So if you're not comfortable using paint, don't use paints. Use pens or pencils or something you feel a little bit more comfortable with. Additionally, some of the pros of using a solid state medium is that it's yours forever. You don't have to print it off. It's already there. If you want to use it in your church, you can display it at your church on your Sunday school wall. You can even use it for home Bible studies if you want. And so I'm hoping that you will take this project and you will make it something that you'll kind of use for the rest of your ministry time, or at least until you outgrow it to something even bigger. And another pro of this is that odds are most of you have probably been using many of the kinds of tools to make a solid state timeline for most of your life. Rulers, crayons, pencils, pens, timelines, scissors, paste, glue. All these kinds of things chances are you've been using this since you were in kindergarten or first grade. And so I'm hoping that if push comes to shove, this is at least the kind of medium you say, all right, I at least know how to do this without too much problem. Now, of course, the cons of a solid-state medium are also pretty evident. Probably the biggest is you just have to invest in art supplies up front. And if you don't have things like crayons, paper, pencil, poster board, and the like, you'll probably have to run down to a dollar store, Walmart, or other kind of arts and crafts place in order to get the materials you'll need. And so this can make this project a little bit more costly. And so what I usually suggest is start using materials you already have around the home and try to build your idea from that. Now, a second issue is that a mistake in a solid state medium can be costly. That if you've tried to draw something and then you just realized, man, did I really screw that up? You often just have to start over on a new piece of poster board or canvas. And so what I recommend is if you're going to use a solid state medium, draft first in pencil, make a rough draft, and then once you got it where you like it, then produce a final copy using pen, paint, or whatever medium you think would make it look as nice as possible. So let's talk about materials then. If you decide to make something solid state, here's the things that I'm foreseeing that you will need. First, you're going to need a straight edge, a ruler, or a T-square, something that will allow you to draw straight and to consistently measure off your distances. Again, this is meant to be a timeline that is showing relative distances, so you'll want to make sure that all of your dates are spaced equally. Now, you can choose whatever distance you want to use, like 1 inch equals 100 years, 1 inch equals 50 years. It doesn't really matter to me what distance you use, but you'll want to make sure that it's straight, and you'll want to make sure that it's consistently measured. Other tools you'll need pencils, as I said, for doing a rough draft, and then you'll need something a little bit more substantial for your final draft, pens, crayons, actual paint. And you'll probably want to do some things that try to make this project have a bit of color to it. So you may want to use some like pictures that you've cut out, any kind of cutouts using other poster board or maybe even colored paper might be interesting. But again, you're really only limited to your creativity here. And I'm not asking you to go out and purchase hundreds of dollars of supplies, obviously. Start with what you've got around the house and let your creativity kind of direct the way from there. Now, if you decide to go digital, the biggest issue is going to be, do you already have a program that allows you to manipulate pictures and to then draw on those pictures further? As I said, if you're using a personal computer style format or an IBM style format computer, programs like Paint come automatically with that. If you want to use something that's free, you don't want to go out and buy a program for this, I recommend using a program called Prezi. You can access that at www.prezi.com. And that at least is a website that allows you to make fairly good visual presentations, and it's free for students. So you may want to look into that. And here again, you're really only limited to your creativity here. I mean, if you feel comfortable with the program, if you don't mind exploring a little bit on some of these web-based things like Prezi, by all means, have at it. And I hope you have a ball doing it. But the biggest thing I want you to do is work where you're comfortable. If you are comfortable using Paint, go ahead and use the template I'll supply here on the LMS. If you're not comfortable, try using something else, but always work from where you're comfortable. Don't try to overdo this one. Okay, so with all of that in mind, let's review the project requirements. The first thing you're going to need to do is you're going to need to find dates. And I've said that I want 20 total dates on this timeline. And the first 10 of these dates are mandatory, meaning they're not negotiable. I want to see what you can find for each of these dates. And so those dates are, once again, A, can you find me the date when Abraham is first given the covenant of circumcision? You can find that in Genesis 17. B, can you find the date when Moses brought the 10 plagues on Egypt? You can find that story in Exodus Exodus chapter 7 through 12. C, I want you to find the date when Joshua burned the city of Hatzor, and you can find that story in Joshua 11. D, I want you to find the time when Ruth converted to Naomi's religion. You can find that story in Ruth chapter 1. And E, I want you to find the time when King Jeroboam built the 2 altars, one in Dan and one in Bethel. And you can find that story in 1 Kings chapter 12. So continuing on, for the 6th date, F, I want you to find the date when Isaiah predicted the end of the Syro-Ephraimitic War. You can find that in Isaiah 7. For letter G, I want you to find the date when Daniel and his friends are taken captive to Babylon as a prisoner. You can find that story in Daniel chapter 1. For letter H, I want you to find the time when Nehemiah rebuilt Jerusalem's wall. That tale is in Nehemiah chapter 6. For letter I want you to find the time when Jesus Christ died on the cross. You can find that in all the Gospels, but if you want a concise version of that, look in Luke 23. And then finally, J, the last of the mandatory dates, I want you to find the time when Paul wrote the book of Galatians. And you can find the basic ideas around that from Acts chapter 15 and Galatians chapters 1 and 2. So, after you've got those 10 dates, then you're free to find 10 more dates. But there are some restrictions. You just can't find any 10 dates or the first 10 dates that cross your mind. I would like you to limit the dates that you pick to 10 different eras. And so this will give you a wide and broad swath of the types of dates that you'll find in the Bible narratives. So the first of these dates, I want you to find something from the patriarchal era, sometime between 2200 BC and 1805 BC. Next, I want you to find a date from the era of Israelite captivity in Egypt all the way through to the Exodus. So anytime between 1805 BC and 1406 BC. Okay, third, I want you to find a time for the era of the conquest of Canaan. So 1406 BC to 1350 BC. Now, I'm sure you guys have already figured this out. From our Egypt lecture that you'll have in the 3rd week, you're probably thinking, well, the captivity could be in 1406 BC. It could be going all the way into the 1200s BC. If you do decide to go with that date, just simply make sure that your timeline reflects this idea. Okay. For the 4th date, I would like you to find a date from the era of the Judges, approximately sometime between 1350 BC and 1050 BC. For your 5th date, I would like you to find a date for the United Monarchy period, something that happened between 1050 when Saul is anointed king, all the way to 930 when Solomon dies. Okay, for our 6th date that you get to choose, I want a divided monarchy date, sometime between 930 BC and 586 BC. For the 7th date, I would like you to find something from the Judean exile period, sometime between 586 BC and 539 BC. Next, I want you to find a post-exilic date, sometime between 539 BC and 425 BC. And then number 9, this will be the kind of the hardest one. I would like for you to find an intertestamental date, sometime between 425 BC and 6 BC. And that will specifically require you to find a date of an event that would be found in what we call the Apocrypha. And then finally, for the 10th date, I would like you to find one New Testament era date, sometime between 6 BC and 100 AD. Alrighty, folks, so you got all that down. 20 dates. Alright, so now the next question you're probably asking is, well, where do I find these dates? How do I know when an event happened? And the simple answer for that is I'm going to expect you to do some research. We'll call this the college level part of this project. I'm going to need you to actually read through sources and to try to establish when all these things happened. And so the sources can be fairly varied. You can use Bible dictionaries, you can use study Bibles, you can use your textbooks like the Holman Bible Atlas, you can use biblical commentaries. I'll also allow that you can use websites, but I'm going to make a strong request that these have to be scholarly websites. And by scholarly, I mean that it can't just be something that's been thrown together by an anonymous group of people who we don't know what their credentials are. So two of the best ways to tell if a website is scholarly. The first is it some way connected with a university or school? Often this will be easily told if you notice that the website has an .edu ending. Another possibility is if the scholarly website is giving the author's name, i.e. so-and-so PhD or so-and-so doctorate of ministry, whatever, and specifically that the person, when they're giving their data, are fact-checking it by showing where they got their information. College-level scholarship should always trace its sources. You should be able to tell when reading any college-level document where that data came from, who was saying it, and whether or not we trust this person as an authority. And so I would like for you to be doing that on this project. You are going to submit a bibliography with this project. You can submit it as its own file. But what I'm asking for is that your bibliography has at least 5 total sources. Now, you may use one source and find 12 of your dates, and that's fine. But I am wanting you to use at least 5 sources, and I'm hoping that you'll actually check for the same date in multiple sources just to make sure that they're adding up. Because you may find, actually, I'm certain you will find, that not all sources will agree on this sort of thing. So once you've gotten that far, you'll then need to format your bibliography. And the formatting can be a little bit tricky. We're going to be using what's called the Chicago style of formatting. And so for that, here's how you do that. First, you will want to give the author's name of the source you're using. And that name is given with the last name, a comma, and then their first name. So here in this sample, we have Bush, comma, Frederick. After that, you will then have the name of the book or the name of the website. And doing that, you will have that in italics, meaning that the words are slightly slanted, and you'll have the title of the book, followed by a period. Now, after that, you'll undo the italicized font, and you'll go back to stating where did this book get published. And that will be, for this example here, this book was published in Nashville, Tennessee by the Thomas Nelson Publishers in 1996. A good source will have all of that information. Now, if it's a website source, instead of having the publishing information, you'll need to provide me with the HTTP address or the URL address. And so what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to say this website was found at www.soandsoso.com or .edu or whatever the case may be. But I want to be able to look that up because for every web source, I will be checking just to make sure it's a reputable source and that it actually is saying what you're claiming it says. So our next issue for this project is I would like your project to be aesthetically pleasing. And by that, I just simply mean I would like for your project to be attractive to look at. Now, I know what you're saying. If you don't think you have artistic talent, I understand. I don't think I have much in the way of artistic talent either. I'm not going to be judging something as in the A range or the B range or even the D or F range simply whether or not I think it's pretty. To be honest, most of your points are going to come from the accuracy of your timeline. But I am going to be giving some points just to say, did you take your time with this project? Did you try to make it look pretty? Did you try to use available resources to make this thing something you'll be proud of and may even want to show people in the future? My simple rule of thumb is that care and craftsmanship are very easy to spot. And you'll notice throughout this presentation, I've been using some pictures of some of my favorite timelines I've received here over the last couple of semesters, and hopefully it will give you at least a slight idea of what could be possible here. And the last of our project requirements is that I'm going to ask that your timeline needs to convey relative distances. And by that, I simply mean that your timeline uses a consistent scale throughout the entire project. And so the scale can be anything, but I recommend somewhere along the lines of 1 inch should equal about 100 years. And in case you're wondering, interesting fact, since our entire timeline project is covering from 2200 BC at least all the way up until about 100 AD, you're going to need at least 22 to 24 inches if you're going to use the 1 inch equals 100 year scale. Now, if you choose to use something different, like for example 1 inch equals 50 years, your project is going to be much bigger. Likewise, if you use a smaller scale, 1 inch equals 200 years, it's going to be a smaller project, but it may be difficult to read. It may feel crowded. And so my experience is that somewhere between 1 inch equals 100 years to 1 inch equals 50 years is adequate for this project. Now, if you're using a digital format, well, that's going to be a little bit different. You're going to have to, instead of using inches, using a scale of pixels. Now, I will recommend this up front. I do not recommend using PowerPoint to do this unless you state specifically up front that each slide equals 50 years. But even with that being said, sometimes it's very difficult to get a sense of scale or depth. The biggest reason I'm having you do all this is because what I want you to be able to see when you look at your timeline at a glance is to say, oh, this event here in the time of Isaiah is about 6 inches removed from this event here in the intertestamental period. And I want you to have a sense that those 6 inches are hundreds of years, that people have come and gone during this time, and that this prophecy, whatever it may be, had some interest or even fulfillment to this time period up here. I also want you to get used to the idea that in many places in the Bible, we have silence. And this can be seen probably best in the time before the Exodus, that in between the time of Joseph and the time of Moses, we have about 400 years where God isn't dealing with his people at all. He's not sending them prophets. He's not talking to them directly. And so we have just a long period of silence. There will be another one of those just before we get to the New Testament period. And so I want you to get this grasp when you do the timeline, not just of when some of these important events are, but also when are some of these periods where just God is not talking at all. And so keep all of these things in mind as you're doing your project. All right, so with all that in mind, let's go ahead and recap. We're looking first for this timeline project to have 20 dates. 10 I have already selected for you to find, and 10 you can pick for yourself so long as you make sure that each date happens within a certain time period. Second, I want your timeline to use a consistent scale, and you can choose that scale, but once you've chosen the scale, I would like for you to consistently use it throughout the project. Third, I would like this project to show attention to detail and quality, that this is something I'm hoping you'll use in your future ministry. I'm hoping it's something you'll be proud of, hopefully for a very long time. So take the time to make this look nice. Give it more than just a few hours to plan out and make it look as nice as possible. Fourthly, I'm going to request that these projects be as accurate as possible, and that this information on when these dates happen is supported by a scholarly source. And then finally, you will submit to me a bibliography. You can do this on Microsoft Word if you like, but I want at least the 5 sources that you used. Now, if you used more sources, feel free to give me all the ones you did use, but you'll want to submit that separately to me when you submit your timeline project. Well, that looks like it's about it, folks. I hope you found this little presentation helpful. And if you have any other questions, feel free to contact me, and I'll try to help you through it as best I can. Good luck, and we'll see you later as we go back to GB102, Bible Backgrounds.